Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of the Poets Talk Politics sessions that we do here every month at the Comparative Literature Institute of the University of Porto. Today, we're going to talk to Vanessa Place, who I will introduce in a second. The other people I have with me on the panel are Elina Siltanen from the University of Eastern Finland, who specializes in experimental American poetry. Małgorzata Mik from the University of Lodz in Poland, who also specializes in experimental American poetry, and like myself. And then the odd cats here in the panel are Mafalda Pereira, who is a PhD student at the University of Porto. She was like former student of mine. And she did a very nice MA thesis on prison writing in Portugal, right? Which is why I thought it was fitting, for me to invite her to talk to Vanessa today. And then finally, Diogo Marques is a member of the research unit on the digital humanities that we have at the University of Porto, and I think I can say he's generally interested in media study and experimental writing as well. So welcome all of you. And then Vanessa, I will introduce Vanessa just very briefly, but I'm going to use the if that's okay, I'm going to use your Wikipedia page, which I just noticed has some very interesting, which I didn't know, which I didn't know about. So Vanessa Place is an American writer and criminal appellate attorney. She is co-editor of the Los Angeles-based Le Figure Press. Place has also worked as an occasional screenwriter on television shows such as Law and Order and Xena the Warrior Princess. Such an amazing show, right? From the 90s, from my youth. I didn't know you had a part in that. That's cool. And then just going to mention a couple of publications that Vanessa has put out over the years. So for example, Notes on Conceptualism, which came out from Ugly Duckling in 2009 with Rob Fitterman, who we also had a couple of months ago here on the show. And then the infamous, I guess, famous and infamous Gone with the Wind project, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point today, from 2011. Last Words from 2015, and the book that we advertised in our poster, You Had to Be There, Rape Jokes, which came out in 2018. So welcome, Vanessa. I believe you're gonna read for a little bit before we start the discussion. So thank you very much for being here today.
Well, then thank you for having me. I thought, given the poster, I would just read some rape jokes. So this will be the shortest and longest reading. Did you hear the one about the Polish rapist? At the police lineup, he yelled, "That's her." Did you hear about the 12 guys who were raping a German woman? She screamed, 9, 9. So 3 of them left. Did you hear about the 6 guys who were raping a German woman? She screamed, 9, 9. So we got 3 more. Who wants to play a rape game? No? That's the spirit. I was raping a woman the other night and she cried, "Please think of my children." Kinky bitch. It must be hard for a woman to get raped. Otherwise, it doesn't go in properly. How do you stop a Mexican valet raping your wife? Seriously, he's been at it for hours and I want my car back. I raped a Paki girl last night. Her parents arranged it. What do you call a rape victim in Dubai? An adulterous whore. After the cuts and bruises have healed and the feelings of shame and misplaced guilt have faded, do rape victims secretly think to themselves, "Oh yeah, I've still got it"? Yesterday, I made a rape joke. My friend said, "Hey, my wife got raped and it's not funny." I said, "Sorry, when did this happen?" "Last week," he replied. "Oh," I said, "was it behind the bus station?" Told my boss, "Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. My sister was raped this morning." "Is she all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "not bad at all." The police came to the door and said, "We want to interview you about raping a girl on a seaside bouncy castle. What do you have to say?" I said, "What a fun but unusual way to be interviewed." My girlfriend cuddled up to me after sex. "Have you ever thought about, children?" she asked. Fuck, I thought, how does she know? My daughters started to become interested in sex. Finally, she used to just lie there and cry. I got drunk last night, raped my daughter, and now I feel terrible. Took some aspirin, but the headache's still there. Losing my virginity was like learning to ride a bicycle. My dad was behind me all the way. Truth is, my dad really has my back. Two squirrel girls were walking. One says to the other, "Do you believe in the devil?" The other girl says, "The devil, don't be daft. The devil's like Santa Claus. It's only your dad." My girlfriend got upset the other night when I laughed at a rape joke. She said, "That's sick. What would you do if I was raped?" "Well, love," I said, "I'd start by showering and burning my clothes." What's the difference between a joke and 3 cocks? The girl we met last night couldn't take a joke. What's the difference between a joke and 2 cocks? You can't take a joke. Do you find rape jokes funny? Never mind. I know you mean yes. A rape victim walks into a bar. Turns out that was her first mistake. Fishing and rape, they have so much in common. They both start with a lot of waiting around in secluded areas, followed by a sudden rush of excitement, and then the old dilemma: do I kill it or let it go? As a policeman, I deal with rape victims on a daily basis. Women seem to really trust me when I'm in a police uniform. Biggest lie, the check's in the mail. Second biggest lie, keep your fucking mouth shut, bitch, and no one gets hurt. Favorite pickup line? "Hey, does this rag smell like chloroform or is it just me?" Favorite pickup line? "Get in the van." Tickling, rape for beginners. Rape, because I'm a lover and a fighter. I like my women how I like my light bulbs, easily turned on, not too bright, and hung from my ceiling with an electrical cable. How many rapists does it take to change a light bulb? None. Who the fuck rapes in a life? How many white men does it take to screw in a light bulb? The number doesn't matter. A white man will screw anything. I followed a woman through a park last night. As I got closer, she started running, so I ran after her. When I finally caught her, I said, "Do you have a cigarette?" "Thank God," she said. "I thought you were going to rape me." "Right," I said, "the cigarette is for after." I like my women how I like my Christmas trees, illegally taken in the forest. If you rape a woman in the woods and no one hears it, does she have a case? Told my friend I'm the result of my mother being raped. "Who raped her?" he asked. "Duh," I said, "my dad." Rape, just like regular sex, but with a winner. Rapists, they come and go. Rape, the only time you take it and leave it. If rape is so wrong, why did God make men stronger than women? Rape is a 9-letter word. There's a silent woman at the end of it. Silence is golden. Duct tape is silver. I never talk during sex. As my mom said, never talk to strangers. How did the priest find the little boy in the forest? Very nice indeed. You know you're getting older when you walk by a couple of priests and they don't even look at you. What's black and blue and doesn't like the dark? The little boy in my basement. Ever since my wife was brutally raped, she has no sex drive, which explains why she keeps being brutally raped. What do spinach and anal sex have in common? If you're forced to have it as a kid, you'll hate it as an adult. What's the best part about sex with a 4-year-old? Watching him cry on the witness stand. What's the best part about fucking a 14-year-old in the shower? When her hair gets wet, she looks 12. Can you take a joke? Never mind. Of course you can. If you didn't want to hear rape jokes, maybe you shouldn't have dressed like you wanted to hear rape jokes. They say all women have rape fantasies, so they aren't that different to men after all. Lots of men give women nights they'll never forget. I prefer to give them nights they'll never remember. I once shagged a woman into unconsciousness. Just joking. She was unconscious when I found her. The police asked me to participate in a lineup. I said, yeah, no problem. I'd love to see her again. As a judge, I'm constantly faced with the same dilemma. The Black guy obviously did it, but then again, the woman is always wrong. A Catholic priest has spoken up in outrage that man who raped and impregnated his two daughters. He said, abortion is a sin. If God doesn't need a woman's consent to get her pregnant, why the fuck should I? Statistically, only 1 in 10 people don't like gang rape. Tried a gang rape the other night, but it's practically impossible to pin down 10 Black guys. Saw a girl being raped on a bus in Delhi, so I rang the bell. The bus driver asked if I wanted to get off. Yes, I replied, but I'll wait my turn. What's white on top and black on the bottom? Society. What's black on top and white on the bottom? Rape. Only 6% of all rape cases end in conviction. Anyone else like those odds? I like to watch rape trials. When the defendant is found not guilty, I follow the rape victim home and rape her. I mean, who's going to believe her? Half of me is a clown, the other half a rapist. Most women just don't see my fun side. There is no I in you yet. A large number of people say they would like to die during sex, so call me a people pleaser. I raped a woman last night. She must have been expecting it, though. She dressed up as a nurse for me. I simply do not understand those men who rape and then kill young women. After all, if you rape them properly, they kill themselves. There's only one thing worse than raping a feminist, not raping a feminist. They say the 2 wrongs don't make a right. On the other hand, I rape pedophiles. Little Johnny was taking confession, and he told the priest that he was having impure thoughts about his sister. Is this a sin, Father? He asked. The priest nodded and said, yes, little Johnny, indeed, it is a sin. Look at the 2 beautiful brothers you have. Reports say that pedophiles prefer blonde hair and blue eyes. Does no one care what someone's like on the inside anymore? That's the thing about pedophile jokes. They never get old. People who are scared of pedophiles need to grow up. They say most victims of rape know their attacker. But surely if you go around making friends with a rapist, you've only yourself to blame. After raping someone, I like to give them a bit of a tickle. Once I've made them laugh, they just can't stay mad at me anymore. Some people don't like rape jokes. I find it helps break the awkward silence after. According to statistics, 90% of rapes are committed by someone the victim knew. Shouldn't that really say someone the victim thought they knew? A man comes into a bar. No, wait, it was a horse. A man comes into a horse. I used to be afraid of pretty girls until I realized they were much more afraid of me. Freud said that jokes are a way of discharging hostility and sexual desire. So, joke's on you. At some point, isn't all sex consensual? You know what I think about people who don't like rape jokes? Fuck them. If you didn't want to hear a rape joke, why did you come? Fucking kids are expensive, I said. Replied my lawyer. I've got this really funny joke about rape. Actually, no, you had to be there.
Thanks a lot for that, Vanessa. So let me just, let's see. So maybe, Elina, do you want to ask the first question?
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that reading, first of all. It was certainly interesting to hear it read out loud as well, because I don't think I've heard that before. But I mean, I read the book, but I haven't heard your readings. But one thing that I wanted to ask about is how much framing does conceptual poetry need? Because one of the things that I noticed about the book, You Had to Be There, is that it had several statements from people commenting on this text and your own artist statement as well. But that's not always the case with conceptual poetry. It doesn't always come with a critical apparatus, and I don't think it has always been the case with your work either. And partly maybe the absence of such commentary is something that maybe then affects how people are going to approach it. Maybe they have difficulties dealing with the material or something like that, difficulties reacting to the more provocative varieties of conceptual writing. So maybe that then suggests that, at least for some people, the simple act of presenting something as poetry is not necessarily always enough. And if not, does that then mean that the author's intention is ultimately the most important thing in a conceptual poem? And how do we then decide when there's enough of a framing? Is it when the idea is good enough or nuanced enough, or does it need to be explained as well? What if people don't understand the idea? So should it be enough for people to just read and think for themselves, or should we have these kinds of framings for this kind of work as well? I'd like to hear your thoughts on this matter.
I personally hate framing. I think framing is in a large way actually counterproductive to the work, because, as you say, and I think you're exactly right, what ends up happening is when you give the frame, you are privileging the artist's intent, which is not really, for my work anyway, has never really been the point of the project. And in a performance, when I perform, I never introduce the work. I just start. Because what I find is that, and especially because a lot of my projects have been, I don't want to say provocative, but the idea that I have going in is that what I'm trying to do is create the possibility for an event. So the audience doesn't know why I'm doing it. They don't know how I feel about it. So they're just left with their own interpretation and their own, and it's also, sorry, this is a bit of an aside, but there's a durational quality to the work. So your immediate take on it may shift. You can go through having different reactions and different thoughts to it. If I've already thumbed the scales, so to speak, if I've already said, well, this is the point of the work, that I'm foreclosing all the possible reactions to it. And quite frankly, my feeling is that while my interpretation or my desire for the work is interesting to me, it really shouldn't be that interesting to the audience. And personally, what I'm interested in is in the audience's reaction, not my own. I already know my reaction. So what I'm curious to see is how they will receive it in all the different ways that they'll receive it. And I'm not interested in blocking that or directing it in any particular way. If people get outraged, fine. If people have a different, or welcome it, fine. If the point of the work, like any piece of art, I think, is that it can contain its own ambivalences and its own ambiguities, and people can approach it in different ways. So yeah, I despise framing. I didn't want to do an artist statement for the book, but the publisher wouldn't do the book unless I did an artist statement. So I tried to do as ambiguous an artist statement as possible.
Thanks, Vanessa. Maybe Mafalda now can go and ask a question.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My question is not about Rachel jokes, but it's about your statement of facts project.
Mm.
I found it quite interesting how these appellate briefs, when read outside of a courtroom, take on a fictional nature, although we never forget that there was a victim and that someone was indeed arrested. It also seems to me that these briefs highlight the victim's inability to remember everything in full, which makes the reader skeptical and uncomfortable with the victim's narrative. So I would like to ask you if your intention with this work was to problematize the boundaries between fact and fiction, or fact and truth, because it seems to me that in this book, the very possibility of reaching a truth about the facts is at stake. And I would also like to know what kind of reactions you have had from your readers, since the stories that are told are quite violent and disturbing.
I remember doing a performance from Statement of Facts shortly after it came out, and somebody in the audience became really, really upset and started crying and had to leave, and afterwards confronted me about that and said something like, how could you do that to me? And I said, well, actually, I didn't do anything to you. I presented a piece of art, and you had a very strong emotional reaction to it. And to me, that what you experienced was a limit to what you want art to do, which is fair. But at the same time, it is art. When I presented these materials in a court of law, they were very functional. They were made to make an argument for my client. When I present them as art, they're not functional at all. As you say, they raise other questions about narrative, questions about truth. The whole point of Statement of Fact as a title is that is a section in an appellate brief. But all that means is that in a trial, two sides may be presented. If the jury votes to convict the person, they've accepted one side as fact. That becomes what is labeled fact. Is it the truth? Who knows? Is the truth what the defendant said? Who knows? You know, whatever the truth is irrelevant. We're just saying these are the facts now. So that was interesting to me. What's also interesting to me is the kind of role of narrativity. You know, there's a joke that criminal defense attorneys have, which is, it's not whether it's true, it's whether it's believable. And I think that's what we look for in what we call truth, is a narrative that's believable, that usually supports the conclusion we would like it to support. And so I think that there is something to me about, in terms of that project, and it was 3 volumes, the entire project, the Tragedia project. And the idea was, like Dante's Commedia, hell is a narrative. Like, there's stories in the Inferno. There's stories in Statement of Facts, and they're the stories of the damned. Statement of the Case is a procedural history. It's like Purgatorio. It's like you get a little bit of the story, but it's mostly what you need, what you've done wrong, and what you need to do to atone. And then argument, like Paradiso, is where greater truth and the divine order of thing comes in and neatly processes the messy facts of something, right? Makes it for a higher good. But also, like Paradiso, the law doesn't actually make sense. You know, there's so many points where Dante's always asking Virgil, but why? But why? Or Beatrice, but why? And the answer many times is, well, you just wouldn't understand. God's laws beyond our understanding. But I think so is man's laws beyond our understanding in many ways. It's just we make these arguments. So I think for me, part of that project was, yes, it problematizes what is the truth versus what we accept as fact, what we cling to as narrative, but the narrative phrase a bit, the mystery of the law, but the fantasy that the law can address things. So I was playing with a lot of those concepts within it, and at the same time making the law not functional. These people are already in prison.
Diogo? Maybe?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jean-Paul, and to all my colleagues on Zoom. And thank you, Vanessa, for the reading. I read the book, and I was expecting to confront my reading with your performance of it. And well, I'm particularly glad to be here because it was an opportunity to get to know better your work, Vanessa. And this is the kind of poetic and political work that interests me, especially for being, I'm going to say, an anti-disciplinary perspective. Well, and I must confess that the first time I heard about your work was on Mackenzie Work's book, Philosophy for Spiders, where there is a quote where you refer to Kathy Ecker. So when I prepared these questions, I also had my readings of that in mind. I found it profoundly significant the way in which you kind of navigate the delicate balance between sparking critical discussions on these topics and intentionally, or sometimes perhaps unintentionally, causing discomfort or distress to your audience, be it a reader or people who actually pay their tickets to watch performance art. And in Rape Jokes, for instance, you walk on complex terrain by intertwining humor with serious subject matter. And when I read your work and saw online some of your performances, I started thinking of Judith Butler's reflection on frames of war. When is life grievable? Where she defines grievable as life that is deemed worthy of mourning after it is lost. So in order to be grievable, life has to be first recognized as a life, and that recognition depends on how that life is framed, or better yet, socially framed. Now, in your performances, especially when the spotlights are on the audience, and I believe that actually happens sometimes 2/3, I think, of the performances on the spotlights are on the audience. Do you notice variations in how the humor scale oscillates up and down, or perhaps left and right, based on the subject or target of the joke? For example, is there a contrast in the audience's reactions when the joke involves a woman compared to a man, a trans individual compared to a cis-normative person, or someone of Pakistani descent compared to someone of Mexican descent?
Yeah, I'm having several thoughts at once. In the performance, what I like about it, so the performance, just for people who haven't seen it, when it's done in the way I like it to be done, the first 2/3, it's more sort of a club atmosphere. It's darkly lit. I'm speaking at a stand-up mic. The sound comes from front-facing monitors like they would in a club. It's more intimate. And then again, about 2/3 of the way through, I step back and I'm backlit, so the audience can only see my silhouette. But they can see each other, and I can see them. And the sound source changes direction. I've done it where it comes from monitors behind the audience, so suddenly my voice is coming from behind them, not in front of them. Once I did it, which was great, where the audience was seated on bleachers and the sound source was coming up from underneath them, which I thought was the best poetic moment. But and it does change, because in the dark, what I noticed was, in kind of general way, and I've said this before, but people who walked into the performance, maybe they'd start laughing right away. And something would happen. It'd be too much, or there'd be a particular topic, and then it's not funny anymore. It's like it's too much, or it's gone on too long. Other people who walked in thinking rape jokes aren't funny, this isn't funny. At some point, something's funny. And, you know, humor is also non-consensual. You can't decide to not find something funny. If it hits you as funny, it's actually not volitional. So you can suppress a laugh, but you know that you wanted to. But once the lights are on them, the discomfort of finding something funny and looking around to see if it's okay to laugh, to see if other people are laughing, looking at people are laughing. So suddenly, again, the audience realizes like they're the performance, not me. What I also noticed was I did a couple of times when I did the performance, there would be there was an announcement that there would be a Q&A after. And the first time there was a Q&A, there was supposed to be a Q&A, performance ended. Okay, it's time for the Q&A, but I ended the performance, I picked up my bag and I left. And again, afterwards, people were upset, and so I got these emails and they were like, you know, there was supposed to be a Q&A. And I said, well, there was, I just wasn't there for it. Like, you can ask each other your own questions and provide your own answers. And, you know, I'll also point out, this is not unlike the experience itself. You're left with your own questions and you have to figure out your own answers. And then there was another time where there was a Q&A and I said, well, I'm not going to answer any questions, but I'll ask questions. And one of the questions I asked was, well, were any of the jokes funny? So some people raised their hand. I said, well, which ones? They told me. And I pointed out that what was interesting to me was that they could find certain rape jokes funny, but no one found any of the jokes they deemed racist funny. And I thought this is an interesting where we draw the line situation. What I also noticed is performing in different English-speaking countries, if I make a Mexican joke in the United States, it's racist. If I make a Paki joke in the United States, it's not really considered racist. Like that denomination of racism doesn't have the same resonance. Versus in the UK, a Paki joke is obviously racist. Mexican joke less so. So, I mean, these jokes are, I like this kind of material in a way because on the one hand, it's really stupid, but its stupidity illuminates certain things. You know, what is racism actually? Is racism contextual? Is racism just delimited by what we understand as racism? Is a rape joke, can a rape joke be funny? Why is it funny? Why do we tell them? What's the currency of them? What do they betray about our own anxieties around sex and power, and or the way that where I ultimately came to was that we perhaps experience desire itself as non-consensual. I don't choose to have desire. I don't choose for somebody else to have it for me. Ideally, you have it and the object of it also has it, coincidentally. But that there's something about the joke that alleviates the feeling of violation that desire itself maybe encompasses. So those were the things that, and maybe that, to go to your Butler point, that's the kernel of the human in it, which is also why they're funny. Yeah, and I was thinking when you were saying about Butler, also my Last Words project, where I'm just saying the last words of executed inmates. without reference to whatever hideous crime they did. Because in part, my idea with that project was if the last words are legible to us, the expressions of love, the expressions of remorse, the expressions of anger, whatever they are, then the person that is being executed is actually a person. Like there's another murder taking place.
Goshka? I'll go last.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me and for this reading. The other day I was rereading 7 Discourses, the conversation that you had with Divya Victor a couple of years ago. And I remember 2 things in particular. One thing is you mentioned there that there is in the US, when you were having this conversation, you were talking about the freedom of speech versus the lack of the freedom of expression, if I understood correctly. And then the phrase that you used and that really struck me was, I, and you used the inverted commas, I have no right to stay silent. So then I was thinking about also your idea that you are a mouthpiece as you read, right? Your strategy of ventriloquy. Would you like to comment on this strategy in your work more broadly?
I think my work tends to go in 2 wildly different directions, and it's not and luckily it's not my job to figure this out completely. And on one side, I'm very clearly the author. And there's a certain kind of voice that comes into play. On the other side, I clearly am not the generator. I haven't generated the text. And at some point, what attracted me to conceptualism was this feeling of I don't need to. The text I find says everything already. And there's a side, I think, discourse about, going back to an earlier point about sort of anti-disciplinary tactics. But the text itself says something, but nobody's saying it. So as under the whatever the mantle of being the artist, I can represent it. It's a little Duchamp, but not exactly, because he tended to be a little more direct in saying, no, I am the artist. That's what makes it art. And I think my argument is a bit more of, oh, it's already poetry. And so I can ventriloquize, and which becomes interesting in a disciplinary way of, oh, now you're willing to listen to it. Because me and using this body, this voice to do it gives it import that it didn't have, but maybe it already should have had. But also there is a beauty to the language. I mean, when I was working on the rape jokes book, most of the jokes were from crowdsourced sites where people tell each other these jokes. And I started becoming really fascinated with the form too. And so would massage them a little bit, would be like, oh, this is actually a really good joke, but it goes on a couple of beats too long. How can I make it a little tighter? How can I write my own rape joke? Let me do that. So that one was slightly less ventriloquism, but but still this idea of, well, but what I really am is providing a conduit for something, though the other joke about ventriloquism, obviously, is there is no separate entity. The ventriloquist is, of course, the dummy. right? The dummy is being manipulated, then back. I mean, it's a dialectical relationship. And that also interests me, because in some ways I can say that I perform the same function as a lawyer, right? It's like I'm speaking, the law is speaking through me, but it's also being distorted a bit through me in order to make a kind of point. So the work that I do that's more purely generative, maybe it's a bit of a conceit that I need to say it directly, but then the work where it's more ventriloquized, there is something where the use of ventriloquism maybe enables me to speak in ways that that would be foreclosed. I'm thinking there's a project I've been working on for a couple of years that I haven't published yet, where I've taken lines from letters written to me by my clients. And some of these sentences, some of these lines are just amazing. And if I didn't, it's arguably unethical for me to do this because they're confidential communications, and I don't put anything in that would identify a particular case or a particular person. But for me, it's if I don't pull these, if I have the ability to pull these out, represent them as poetry, otherwise they're lost, and the people who wrote them are lost. And so in that way, the I have no right to stay silent, I think, can also work. Like, I have no right to stay silent in this context, but I also cannot speak. Yeah, it's.
Thank you.
So, excuse me if my question is a little long-winded. I'll try to make it as short as or as brief as I can, right? So, to begin, like Elina and I, a couple of years ago, wrote an article about a project that you may know by Steve Zoltansky called Bribery. And there, like, the premise of the project is, there's this character that he makes up that wants to become the worst person possible in the world, right? That's the conceptual premise of the book, right? And so here, what I find interesting as a sort of commonality between a lot of conceptualist projects, right, is that and sort of in line with what Flarf was doing a couple of years ago, right? Is that you, or all of you, I guess, or most of you that are, artists that identify yourselves as conceptualists, are very much interested in material that people would find not only offensive, because I mean, that's taking it too maybe lightly, but in like things that we would see as evil, or that would make people evil, or that we would classify as being beyond the pale, right? You just shouldn't discuss this. This should not be like in the realm of like public debate or whatever, right? And so before you, just 1 month ago, we had Lyndon, who fell from grace for different all kinds of reasons. But one thing that I think he shares with like you and with Rob Fitterman, etc., right, is that he's also interested in exploring the language of people that would maybe not be taken into account in like an academic circle, right, or in academia in general, right? Because at the end of the day, we know that I suspect, at least, that most of the poetry that you guys made is read by us or by colleagues of yours. right? So this is a very like sort of closed feedback loop that we're all involved in, right? And so my point is, what I find very interesting about Lynn's project, and I said so last time, is that, you know, he himself says that, you know, my favorite American poet is Walt Whitman, right? And because Whitman sort of brought out that side of, you know, American society, right? Like I'm not just going to tell the stories of like, you know, the everyman, right? But I'm going to tell the stories of, you know, prostitutes and criminals and, you know, all of these people that are maybe outcasts, right? That no one wants to hear about their stories or whatever, right? And so I guess that, you know, back then, and this was an argument that Elina and I made when we wrote our piece, right, is that American literature in particular seems to me to be very interested in evil, right? And exploring that side of things, right? That side of the human psyche, right? I remember we borrowed some quote from Hawthorne, who was also very much interested in this, right? In which he says that, you know, you're most authentic, right? And authenticity is, of course, an issue for conceptualism as well, right? Like being authentic, whether or not you're being authentic, etc. Hawthorne was saying something along the lines of, you know, you're most authentic when you sort of stay true to the evil within you, or you're self-conscious about, you know, being evil yourself, right? And this is something that I think, you know, what attracted me the most about rape jokes was the fact that you're very blatantly, right, bringing out that side of people's psyches, right? You're very much appealing to that, right? It's not just, oh well, you know, it may be, you know, politically incorrect, or it may be offensive, as we've already discussed. But no, like we why do we laugh at these things, right? Like in general, not just, you know, whether it's a Paki joke or a Mexican rape joke, etc. Right? Jokes are not supposed to be funny, yet, right? We kind of find them funny in general. Like at least I do. Maybe I'm the. So my question to you is whether or not you see this as a concern, right, in your work, right? Like to bring out, you know, violence and, you know, meanness or whatever is, you know, the dark side of, you know, society, of the human psyche or whatever, whether or not that's at all a concern for you, because it seems to me that it is, but I may be wrong.
I'm trying to think exactly which definition of concern you're using. Am I concerned by it? Is it of interest? Yeah.
Of interest. Like whether you think, let's say, I guess my question is whether you think that's something that's lacking, let's say, in most, you know, mainstream poetry.
I think yes. And I mean, a couple of things. There is a certain body of conceptual writing that I think, yes, is interested in this. I think there's also a bunch that isn't particularly, that's more interested in the quotidian, that's more interested in the boring, you know, that kind of thing, or the absurd. I'm thinking of Zoltansky's Pad, for example, where he measures everything in his apartment relative to the size of his penis. Yeah, which is a very smart work, and it's also very stupid. You know, it's a great piece. But I also, when I remember doing rape jokes in Ljubljana, and Mladen Doler was the respondent. And it was very interesting because what he was focused on wasn't the political incorrectness or anything like that, but this takes something out of the realm of the private. Like these jokes are usually told between men. They're usually told, it's a private moment, a little stupid way of bonding, a little stupid signifier of masculine fraternity. And so for a woman to do it publicly, that's why it's uncomfortable. Really. And I think there is something about the psychoanalytic in these pieces. And in a kind of base way, psychoanalysis is itself concerned with the dark side of one's psyche. You know, nobody's sitting in their analyst's office talking about how much they love their wife. You know, it's like, you know, or the children, so great. It's the unmanageable, and the unmanageable violence of one's own emotions, and the unmanageable violence of fantasy. Like, that's the thing that I think full humanity demands, is kind of grappling with it, accepting it, understanding that is also fundamentally human. And which obviously, and I hate to say this, and one of the things that I've always hated is the stupid performativity of virtue. You know, like with the Gone with the Wind project, with the rape jokes, that honestly, did people think I was going to have to make some disclaimer that I was against slavery, or thought that rape was like a bad thing? You know, that you know, they're just, it's ridiculous. But on the other hand, I would say there is so much of that. And particularly, and I think this was part of my mistake, is that I walked in thinking, oh, poetry, like art, it's a discourse. It's a discipline in which discourse is part of the art form. I don't know if that's the case, except for outside these very small groups. I think that poetry often becomes a balm. It's often becomes a bit of, it's a kind of almost social media as art form, but or an art form that's a bit social media of I will, and it suffers from the same version of capitalism of I'm going to package my subject self, present it in a way so that you look at you with your subject self. We meet in this little capsule of language. You have that beautiful moment where you think, ah, yes, I have felt that way too. And, you know, humanity is all abloom around us. That is not of interest to me at all. I think that gets us absolutely nowhere. I like Instagram. I can go on Instagram and have that feeling 1,000 times in a row. But that's not what I go to art for. You know, I go to art to, and the best art to me is there's a before and an after. There was a before I encountered that piece, and there's an after when I've encountered that piece. Something changed. The way I looked at something changed. The way I experienced history changed. So, and so I think the work that's interested in these things is trying to do that as well. It's trying to instigate some sort of shift in perception, that you feeling like you've just found another kindred spirit in your lonely quest to go get through another day doesn't do. But I would also say, this was a side thought while you're asking your question in terms of Whitman, I think it's more like Courbet. And Courbet, when he started doing, you know, the Academy hated his paintings because he was painting peasants. He was painting, you know, he was painting the ugly. But what he also did was the perspective wasn't right. Things weren't right size. The dog was too big, the child too small, and all of that. So there's a lack of realism within the realism. And I think that's also what this work does. You know, rape jokes, usually when they're told by a stand-up comic or something, one is told, two are told. Or they're cut in here and there to get a particular reaction, a little shock. But when you tell 246 of them in a row, clearly that's not the point, right? So the perspective is off. And there's a distortion. And I think that's also, this isn't a faithful reproduction of reality. It's a distortion of reality in order to illuminate something beyond the, oh, these are ugly, or slavery is wrong. Like, I mean, yes, it is a niche art form, but one would hope that people drawn to this niche art form, and all art isn't for everybody, and I hate that too. It's like, you know, I used to say the whole point of a museum is you go into one room and there's a painting of a banana, and you go, oh, that is a banana. You go into another room and there's a yellow thing, and you go, oh, I get it, it's a banana. And then you go into another room and the room is all yellow, and you say, oh, I get it, I'm the banana. Like, and not everybody understands they're the banana. But I'm interested in art that makes you realize you're the banana, which I hope is a metaphor that clarifies things enormously.
Vanessa and everyone, do we have time for another like quick round of questions? Like, is that okay with you, Vanessa?
That's fine.
All right. So maybe we can go in the same order. So with Elina, Mafalda, Diogo, and Goska.
Okay, yes. My second question then relates to humor and the Rape Jokes project. Well, in the beginning of You Had to Be There, there's a quotation apparently from Slavoj Zizek, where it said that Vanessa Place demonstrates that when things get really horrible, every gesture of dignity and compassion is a fake, and only humor works. Humor which does not make fun of its object, but bears witness to our impotence and failure to deal with the object appropriately. And I think that's a really good comment. And it also reminded me of this academic article that I read by Gracie Rustad and Kai Hanno Schwind, which is about metamodernism. I don't know if people listening to this are very familiar with metamodernism, but it's one of these labels that are suggested as a reaction to or a follow-up from postmodernism. And they argue then in their article that metamodern sitcoms are more interested in laughing with than laughing at the object of the joke. And that's presented as a step away from the kind of all-pervasive irony that plagued postmodernism. So I'm wondering then, do you think that the Rape Jokes project, or do you think that it could be read in this context? And if so, if we're laughing with something, then what are we laughing with? Well, because to me, at least, it seems that, well, in some ways, a lot of these jokes, what they make fun of is maybe the rapist, because that's the person who kind of, we don't expect it to be the rapist who's speaking, but then it always is. But then at the same time, I at least feel that it's hard to laugh at the rapist. It's not supposed to be funny. So if we're laughing, what are we laughing at?
I think we're laughing at the absurdity of human desire. I think we're laughing at our ridiculous positions as these desiring creatures that can't control themselves. And, you know, is it a matter of degree if I send one text too many or look too long at someone? Or, you know, most of us behave, at least overtly, but the realm of fantasy is very expansive. So I think we are laughing at ourselves ultimately, or that's the idea. And the capacity that we have to also, there's a great quote from a case that I saw not that long ago about the human species has an endless capacity to inflict damage on each other, which I thought was just great and didn't expect to see in a legal opinion. But I think that's it. It's like, I remember this is an aside, which is very bad, but I can't help it, where I read a book on humor in Nazi Germany, which was written actually by Bernard Herzog's son. And the funny thing about humor in Nazi Germany is it stops. Like there's a certain period of time where they just killed everybody who made jokes, so there's no more jokes. But there was one great joke, and I thought this was a great joke. I told it at a dinner party once and was never invited back, but I'll tell it now because it's not a dinner party. But the joke was, this guy comes back from being in Dachau, and he says, "Doc, you know," he says, "Oh," he said, no, wait." He comes back and he says, "What was Dachau like?" The guy goes, oh, I'm screwing up the joke. Okay, let me start over. Somebody says, "What's Dachau like?" He says, "Well, here's the thing about Dachau. There's barbed wire machine guns. Get through that, a couple 100 yards, another barbed wire machine guns. Get through that, another couple 100 meters, more barbed wire, more machine guns. But I'll tell you what, they can't keep me out." So what are you laughing with, right? It's the absurdity of the concentration camp, the absurdity of humanity, the absurdity of the twist in the joke, which is not about escaping Dachau, but about, oh, if you're guarding something that well, everybody must want to go in. And of course, the point that, well, you don't really have a choice whether you're in or out. So I think that there is, and I like that Zizek blurb, because I think that's precisely it, of what's the realm of these things where in a different historical context, if you tried to explain concentration camps to somebody who knew nothing about history, it would seem like ridiculous, you know? And what a different history it would be if the first time somebody came up with this idea, everybody just took a beat and then started laughing hysterically at the insanity of it. So I think the meta there is, yes, we are capable of very elaborate solutions to very stupid and human problems.
So now it's my turn. Now, João. So I have some questions for you. The first one is about your work, Last Words, that you've mentioned already today. I would like to know, why did you decide not to include the last words of the inmates in the printed book? And my next question is not just about last words, but more about your conception of justice. When I think about your work, it seems to me that you try to give more visibility to certain crimes and prisoners people generally feel less empathetic about. So my question is, do you, through your work, seek to humanize all types of criminals? And I would also like to know, what is your opinion about incarceration itself as a practice?
Oh, very
Sorry, Vanessa, before you begin, let me just say that I think Mafalda forgot, because I saw her questions beforehand. I think your question was also, Mafalda, like, why did Vanessa like have all the quotes in last words in her own voice, right?
No, yeah, I just shorted a little bit. Yeah.
Why they were in my own voice? Oh, that is in part, it was part of the idea of, well, I'm the lawyer and that's what I do all the time anyway, is I speak for. And also playing with this idea of my position being, I have a voice that's an educated woman with a kind of television, American television voice. So maybe you can hear what people are saying if it comes from with this voice that you wouldn't hear if it came from a voice that sounded differently raced, that sounded uneducated, that there's something about the act of ventriloquism in that specific way that makes things sound more reasonable, I don't know, or more tenable. In terms of the crimes and empathy, part of why I started representing sex offenders was because I understood that almost every other kind of crime, there is a built-in empathy, or at least understanding for. Like all of us, I'm sure if we had no money and needed food, would steal. All of us, I'm sure if we were angry, we can understand somebody being so angry that they might kill someone. I can understand if I was in a gang, would I shoot somebody? Probably yes. That's what happens if you're in a gang. But sex crimes are the only crimes where most people say, I cannot see myself doing that. I cannot understand why someone would want to have sex with a 4-year-old. So to me, that became precisely the point at which, oh, then you really have to confront whether you believe in the law or not. Because if you believe in due process, if you believe in these things, if you believe in the idea that punishment doesn't necessarily always have to be the most severe, these are the cases. You can hate my client, you can hate what they did, but the law still applies to them. So it's a little bit forced empathy of saying these people are not monsters, these people are human. And so they're the end test of that, which goes into the incarceration question. I can't say that I'm a prison abolitionist. There are certain people that I've represented and still represent that I think, yeah, they need to be somewhere. Because if they're out, they will do very bad things. I don't think they necessarily need to be mistreated. I don't think they need to be mistreated. I don't think that they need to be necessarily horribly miserable, but I do think that there are some people that cannot be in the general populace. I think that in the United States, we over-incarcerate, and we're incredibly happy to spend a lot of money keeping people locked up and not spend much money trying to reduce the conditions that cause people to be locked up. That's pretty easy. But and there's also hospitals, but hospitals for, in this country anyway, hospitals for sex offenders are not particularly great. So I don't really have a solution, but I mean, I've had clients that anytime they get out of prison, they will rape a 5-year-old. That's just what they'll do. And
Me now? Yeah. Well, I would like to go back a little bit to the first question, because there is a thing that I found it interesting when you mentioned, Vanessa, that you were considering not to include the artist's statements. But actually, when I read it, I found it that it was part of the poetic intention. Also, the way you wrote it, beyond the functionalist part of it, of explaining it somehow, but the way you did it, I think it works, and it doesn't work the way we expect. But there is an expression that you mentioned when you say that you are both a criminal artist, and I think these are your words, criminal artist, and a criminal appellate attorney. And then I read your interview with The Guardian in 2015, where there is a statement that reads as follows, and I'll quote it. It's a short one. I see art that's sanitized, art that's precious, art that's playing safe, art for the market. People say they want transgression, that they're looking for the radical edge, but I'm not so sure. There's a certain amount of cruelty in what I do. There has to be. We have to touch nerves, otherwise it's just entertainment. Now, you've mentioned the concept of transgression and the significance of it, and also the need to touch nerves in art here. And given your unique position as both, as you mentioned before, both a criminal artist and a criminal appellate attorney, could you elaborate on how this element of cruelty or pushing boundaries is essential for art to transcend being merely entertaining and take perhaps a more profound significance, particularly in addressing complex societal issues? And in order to help you to clarify my question, I was thinking in the following also. In performance art, I actually tend to see that the one who's giving the performance tends to be omnipotent over the audience. And there is this morale that you can apply to the ones that are seeing the performance, but actually sometimes the performer excludes himself or herself from this. But actually, I think you don't do this. From what I heard from several interviews, you actually work with your audience in order to be part of the problem and perhaps part of the solution. Can you elaborate on this a little bit?
I think so. I think I'm not interested. I'm only interested in the question of guilt. I'm only interested in being guilty. So I never try to exculpate myself from what I've done or what I'm doing. And in fact, my performances are usually structured so that I'm the first person to blame. And the reason for that has to do with this idea of criminality, because what I'm also interested in is what's the law here? And like a criminal, I know what it is and I break it and then see what happens. Because sometimes the law is unspoken. You're not supposed to tell these kinds of jokes. You're not supposed to do this. So what I break the law, and then it's up to the audience, because I'm clearly guilty, to decide whether they want to enforce the law or not, or whether the law is relevant, or whether there's maybe another circumstance, a mitigating factor, a different way of looking at it that makes it that makes the law itself stupid. So if art has some potential, and again, I'll just repeat, I'm not interested in finding a solution for others. I'm not interested in directing others as to the right way of being. Because to me, that's another gesture of mastery. And I think perhaps part of the problem is mastery itself and the desire for it. So I'm not interested in pointing out all the ways in which we are all very, very bad and how we could be very, very better. What I'm interested in is, in a kind of more existential way of confronting, that's even a bad word, but absorbing the law within, the desire for criminality within, that there is maybe, and the rape jokes are easy because it's such a simple project, but that is part of the beauty of desire itself. It's non-consensuality. So this is what I want. So I want to be the criminal that says, that's basically pointing out, yeah, fuck the law and fuck me. That seems enough for me.
Just a brief question, which is also a selfish one. I'm really interested in the concept of duration in poetry. And you've already mentioned this concept today, and you mention it in the artist statement as well. You speak about, if I remember correctly, the durational ontology of art. So I'm really interested in your thinking about duration in your work.
I did this piece for the Musée d'Orsay called The Artist is a Trout, where it's a video piece, where I was looking at Courbet's La Tuile and thinking about, so there's two aspects of duration, right? There's the duration of the piece, the duration of the performance. That's one aspect of duration in art. In my book, Dies a Sentence, it's one long sentence. There's durational quality to that. That's one thing that poetry is given. That's one thing performance is given, is it happens over time. So that's one aspect of duration. As I said before, the fact that it's durational means, unlike a painting, you have time built in for your perspective to change, your interpretation to be supplemented, argued against, all of that. But I also think there's a durational ontology in terms of the work and its reception. So what is a piece of art? What is a work? When does it become this thing that we know it as? How does that change? Is it a good painting? Is it a bad painting? Is it all of this shifts depending on the duration of the work and the audience, the way that the audience changes and shifts, and the critical apparatus around it changes and shifts. So I think we're talking about two different ontological registers that happen kind of within each other in different ways. And both of this, I mean, I used to say, when was Gertrude Stein a genius? Like, was she a genius in 1918 when she's writing? Is she a genius in 1946 when Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas comes out? Is she a genius in 1978 when the first dissertation is written about her? Or is she a genius in 1994 when her collected works is published? Like, when does she become a genius? And I think that's a real question. And I don't know particularly if there's an answer. But what there is in that is a kind of refusal to answer, because I also understand that all of these works, they do require whatever the artist is doing, whatever the audience does in response to the work, whatever different audiences do. Again, the critical apparatus, people writing about the work, people thinking about the work, people illuminating and engaging with it in ways. I've read a lot of things about my work. I read a chapter not that long ago in somebody's book, and I thought, I have never disagreed with anything more, and they're completely right. None of what she was saying was part of the work as I envisioned the work, but her argument was impeccable. So who am I, right? It's like, so I think that's what I mean by durational ontology, and to respect both of these modes of it.
All right, then, yeah, we can finish off. I guess my question. I wanted to go revisit the again, like I said, like infamous Gone with the Wind project, just because, no, I mean, not because of the all the hullabaloo around it, but because I do think, I mean, when it was when you put it out, I remember really liking it, and I honestly, I will admit that I hadn't even read most of it or any of it. I was like, oh, Vanessa Place put out this project that, you know, is about X, and I was like, wow, that's really cool, right? And one of the reasons I thought the the idea, right, and the concept of the project was nice, right, is because we haven't really moved past, I feel, right, like if we think about language poetry as being sort of in line with the language turn that we saw happen in philosophy, right, in post 60s, etc., with Foucault and Derrida, etc., all those folks. For a while we were all very interested in how to change the language in which we think, or that we use to communicate. And if we maybe fine tune the language, if you calibrate the language well enough, then all these problems that sexism and racism and all these discriminatory ways of thinking are going to go away, right? And I remember thinking that the reason why the Gone with the Wind project was so interesting was because you were bringing, you were sort of exhuming all this language that we're not supposed to use anymore, right? We're not supposed to use the N-word. We're not supposed to say, again, like to say racist things, right? And which or to think in racist ways. And I know that Zizek, for example, has a very subtle take on this, because he thinks that, and I would agree, right? This is a whole different discussion, right? But I do agree that, making racist jokes is actually a positive thing, right? It actually allows you to maybe connect to, a person from another ethnicity, or whatever, right? Rather than just ignoring it, that we're different, for example, right? Which tends to be the case most of the time. It's just, oh, I'm not going to acknowledge that this person is different from me, or from a different nationality or ethnicity, etc., right? Which tends to be the status quo, right? That we sort of, especially in the States, right? The language police sort of goes after you for saying the slightest thing that's off the mark, right? And I thought, so I going back to my point, I thought the project was interesting because it's sort of, to me, the way I received it, right, I was like, okay, what Vanessa seems to be trying to get at, right, is that we think we've moved past racism because we don't use racist language, and we try to avoid offending other people, etc., right? And yet, you were reminding us, right, on a day, I don't know, like how often the posts were going up, right, on Twitter, right? But what it seemed to me like you were doing was like, yeah, you may think that we're now, all of these things are in the past, right? Like we've become a better society, we've made a lot of progress. But actually, this is just under the surface, right? And again, like, I think the whole reaction that the project received sort of proves the point that people are just not willing to think about whether or not we are still racist, or we think in racist ways, or whether there is still racism, right? That doesn't seem to be like something people want to think about. Right. So as long as the language is clean, as long as we make changes, from sort of top-down changes to the language and to ideology, that seems to be enough for most people, especially in academia, right? As long as you speak in a certain way, that's fine, right? But of course, we know that these things are more deep-seated and more structural than that, right? And I don't know. I thought the project was addressing that in a very subtle way, right?
Yeah, and a couple of things. I mean, that project, it was 6 years, and I was doing 10 tweets a day for 6 years. And so what was kind of interesting to me was not that there were objections, but they took 6 years. And mostly people, it was a really stupid project. Again, it was like so simple. But meanwhile, the theme from Gone with the Wind is played at the Academy Awards. Meanwhile, and the whole thing of doing it on Twitter is just that it just gets folded in amongst all this other language. And my larger point being, and this was where the only point really that I had of objection to the objections was that, and a lot of my work deals with race, and a lot of my work deals with gender, and people get very happy when I deal with gender, because I imagine because I have breasts and a vagina, and so fine, I can talk about that. But people don't like it when I talk about race. But my point is that, one, in a racist society, I am raced as well. And so it's also part of my obligation to address this. Two is racism is, again, an issue that my people created, and the language around that is language that my people generated. So perhaps, again, using the tool of ventriloquism, I can point this out. It's not, and that this is Americana, and it's not about cleaning up our language. It's about, this is our language. This is our literary history. This is, can we, what's the difference between the fantasy in Gone with the Wind about Black and white relationships and the difference in fantasy in Gone with the Wind about male-female relationships? I don't know. There's, every culture, it's funny when you say that about, making the jokes. And one of the things I spent most of my childhood in Europe, and Europeans are much more comfortable making jokes about, the French, the Germans, they're like this, da, da, da. And Americans aren't, because there's a tinge of racism in this. And I don't know if this is a willful, if it's just a stupid way of dealing with what is the difficulty of difference, right? What is the difficulty of, and I think Zizek's right on this too, of you don't have to love your neighbor, hate your neighbor. Everybody hates their neighbor. Their neighbors are loud, they're obnoxious, they have irritating habits, and the food they make smells bad. Once you can hate your neighbor, maybe you don't have to kill them. Like, you can just lightly hate your neighbor. And I'm all for light hatred. I think light hatred is a beautiful thing, and we should do it as often as possible. It's very soothing, that like slight feeling of, I cook better things. So I think that the thing with the Gone with the Wind was, again, it's like, this is just part of the air. And so if we can tolerate it, and what was also funny to me about that project is people got upset with me, but they didn't get upset with Gone with the Wind. And that's a particular point of purchase to take, of, well, I don't mind the thing, I just don't want you to point at it all the time. And it's like this is a side, but the argument about monuments, and do you pull them down? Do you put them in museums? Do you And perhaps my partner now, her whole point is, well, why have monuments? Like, should the conversation be no more monuments? I don't know. But, or to my mind, is the conversation like, why do we want monuments so very much? So we get rid of this bad one and put up a good one, but God, don't ever let us not have monuments. And so the language things, it's like, oh, please don't take away my racist language or my language of mastery and power. And if really the argument is, well, no, we just want new masters, then I don't know. I don't know. I can't help you. So.
Cool. So yeah, thank you guys, and thanks Vanessa in particular. I think this is fun for everyone. So
that's always my wish. Fun for everyone. Children of all ages.
Your specialty, yeah. It's just making everything fun. Yeah, no, too bad we didn't get to, because one, I mean, I'll shut up in a second. But one thing that we have sort of recurrently been talking about because of the guests that I bring on the show, like we've had Holly Melgard and Joey Algazin. And one thing we do end up talking about a lot is precisely the distinction between stand-up comedy and conceptualism, right? Because Holly, for example, Holly Melgar, a couple of months ago, one of the things she said was that, initially I didn't really want to become a poet at all, right? Like I just wanted to do stand-up comedy, right? So there's a very fine line between the two, but of course,
but see, I think that goes to the first question, then we can finish because I'll close the loop. But this is the problem, is that the frame of stand-up comedy is you're supposed to find it funny. So that's cheating.
Yeah, yes. Anyway, thank you very much, and have the rest of a good day. Like still morning here in the States for me and Vanessa, so we'll have a long day ahead of us. So thanks everyone, and see you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.